By opening the doors of her home to Jennifer, her best friend in apparent despair, Natalie thought she was performing an act of kindness. Yet, within her own home, she was faced with a devastating betrayal that shattered her marriage, stole her house, and left her reeling. However, what seemed to be the end of her story turned into a journey filled with intense twists and a conclusion as unexpected as it was devastating for those who underestimated her. San Jose awoke shrouded in a gentle mist, the street still damp with the dew of early morning. Natalie gazed out from the kitchen window, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. The comforting aroma filled the room, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Looking out at the well-tended garden she and Christian had cultivated together, Natalie felt a faint pang of pride. That house, with its cozy details and warm energy, was the culmination of years of hard work. Christian, her husband of 8 years, was still asleep upstairs. He was a charming man, always impeccably groomed, with a smile that could open doors anywhere. Natalie loved him deeply, though in recent months, something had changed. He seemed more distant, often absorbed in his phone or stuck in late-night work meetings. Natalie wondered if this was just the natural wear and tear of any long-term marriage. That day, however, her unsettling thoughts gave way to a pressing need to help a friend. News of the hurricane that had ravaged the East Coast was stuck in her mind, especially because Jennifer, her best friend since college, was among the thousands who had lost everything. Without hesitation, Natalie called Jennifer as soon as she heard about the disaster. "I can't accept this, Nat. I'm already imposing by just taking your call," Jennifer protested over the phone, her voice thick with exhaustion. "Imposing? Don't be ridiculous. My home is your home. Come here until you can get back on your feet." After some reluctance, Jennifer agreed. 2 days later, she arrived with just 2 suitcases, a grateful smile and eyes heavy with sleepless nights. Natalie welcomed her with a warm hug and the promise that this was only a temporary situation. Jennifer was as beautiful as Natalie remembered. Straight brown hair, green eyes that seemed to read people effortlessly, and a magnetic presence that always made her the center of attention. Despite the hardship, Jennifer carried herself with confidence, something Natalie had always admired. In the first few days, the dynamic between the two friends felt like old times. Jennifer helped around the house, brought energy with her amusing stories, and even Christian, who had initially seemed reserved about the new houseguest, began to warm up to Natalie's friend. But it only took a few weeks for Natalie to notice subtle nuances that made her uneasy. Jennifer laughed a little too hard at Christian's jokes. Christian, who previously barely had time to sit through dinner with Natalie, now lingered in the living room talking with Jennifer. One day, Natalie walked into the kitchen to find the two of them laughing over what seemed to be a private joke. The intimacy in their exchanged glances was like a spark igniting something deep within her. But Natalie dismissed her doubts with resolve. Jennifer was her friend. Christian was her husband. There was no reason to think otherwise. What Natalie didn't realize was that, as she focused on managing the household and her daily life, something deeper was beginning to unfold. Christian, who had always been attentive and loving, became increasingly evasive. One night, Natalie saw him leave their bed to take a phone call in the hallway. When she asked about it the next morning, he brushed it off, saying it was work stuff. Jennifer, on the other hand, seemed more at home than ever. She knew the house's routine, could find anything in the kitchen without asking, and even Max, their adorable golden retriever, started following her around more than he followed Natalie. "Isn't it amazing how Max adores me?" Jennifer remarked one afternoon while petting the dog in the living room. Natalie responded with a smile, but something about the comment lingered with her. It was the sort of thing a guest might say jokingly, but coming from Jennifer, it felt more like a statement of triumph. It was on a Friday night that everything began to change irreversibly. Natalie was washing dishes after dinner while Christian and Jennifer chatted in the living room. Their laughter echoed through the house, and Natalie felt a growing discomfort. When she finished, she walked toward the living room to join them, but stopped at the doorway. That's when she saw it. Jennifer and Christian were sitting on the couch. Not too close, but there was a look, something intimate and loaded with meaning. It wasn't just a casual exchange of glances. It felt like a silent conversation, something that excluded Natalie entirely. Her heart raced, and for the first time she couldn't ignore the sense that something was deeply wrong. "Are you two having fun?" she asked, stepping into the room with a forced smile. Jennifer responded quickly, but Christian hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering, as though he had been caught off guard. That night, Natalie lay beside her husband, feeling uneasy, as if her home, her sanctuary, was no longer a safe place. In the days that followed, Natalie began to notice more. Moments when Jennifer and Christian exchanged glances, stifled laughs that stopped as soon as she entered the room, and the way Jennifer always seemed to find an excuse to be around when Christian was home. Even so, Natalie tried to rationalize. Jennifer was vulnerable, and Christian was just being kind, that was all, right? Yet doubt began to take root. One night, Natalie asked directly, "Do you think Jennifer is getting too comfortable here?" Christian chuckled, almost amused by the question. "You're overthinking it, Nat. She's your friend, that's all." But the light-hearted tone of his response did nothing to ease Natalie's unease. Something was amiss, and she could no longer deny it. As sleepless nights piled up, Natalie began to fear that her kindness, the very virtue that had led her to take Jennifer in without hesitation, might now be her undoing. And so the seed of doubt grew into a constant weight in Natalie's heart, a dark prelude to the storm that was about to upend her life. Natalie tried to maintain an air of normalcy, but the tension within her was impossible to ignore. Every laugh shared between Jennifer and Christian felt like a nail driven into the fragile structure of her peace. Her doubts began to influence her daily routine. For the first time, she hesitated before sharing details of her day with Jennifer, fearing her friend might somehow use them against her. The days became an exercise in vigilance. Natalie tried to act naturally, but her eyes closely tracked every movement, every word exchanged between them. It was one afternoon while she was preparing dinner that the first piece of the puzzle fell into her lap. Christian had left his phone on the kitchen counter, something he never did. He was extremely careful with his devices, but that day he seemed rushed. Natalie noticed the phone as she chopped vegetables. The screen lit up with a notification, a message from Jennifer. For a moment, she froze. There was nothing wrong with Jennifer messaging Christian, right? After all, she lived there. But curiosity overwhelmed her. With trembling hands, Natalie unlocked the phone, something she had never done before, and read the message. "I can't keep doing this to her. We need to talk." The world seemed to spin around Natalie. Her eyes stayed glued to those words, repeating them in her mind like a curse. She heard footsteps and quickly put the phone back, trying to steady her breathing as Christian entered the kitchen. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing her pale face. "Yes. It's just a little warm in here," she replied, forcing a smile as she resumed chopping the vegetables. Christian shrugged, grabbed his phone, and left the kitchen. Natalie watched him out of the corner of her eye, noting how quickly he checked the messages and typed out a reply. That night was the first time Natalie felt the distance between her and Christian as something insurmountable. When he lay beside her in bed, she turned away, pretending to be exhausted, but inside she was fighting not to break down. The next day, the routine continued as usual, but Natalie felt like a stranger in her own home. Jennifer kept acting like the perfect friend, helping with chores and being attentive, but now everything seemed like a carefully rehearsed performance. During lunch, Natalie decided to confront Jennifer, hoping to clear things up. She chose a moment when Christian was at work, ensuring they could talk alone. "Jen, I need to ask you something," Natalie began as they sat in the living room. Jennifer looked at her, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "Of course. What's wrong?" Natalie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "You and Christian, is there something going on between you?" Jennifer laughed, but the reaction felt exaggerated, almost forced. "What? Nat, that's ridiculous. Christian is your husband." "I saw the message on his phone, something about not being able to do this to me," Natalie said, watching Jennifer closely. Jennifer's smile vanished, and for a brief moment, her face betrayed a flicker of nervousness. "I was talking about how guilty I feel for staying here so long. You know how much that bothers me, don't you?" Jennifer stood up and began adjusting the couch cushions, as if trying to avoid Natalie's gaze. "Sorry if it sounded strange, but I'd never do anything to hurt you." The explanation made sense, but it didn't erase Natalie's discomfort. Something about Jennifer's demeanor felt off, as if there was a layer of truth hidden behind her words. In the days that followed, Natalie tried to act normally, but her suspicions lingered. Her trust in both Christian and Jennifer was shattered, and life at home became an exercise in patience. One night, Natalie decided she needed definitive proof. After Jennifer and Christian had gone to bed, she quietly went downstairs and began searching through Jennifer's belongings. She found nothing suspicious at first, just clothes and personal items scattered carelessly. But when she opened the nightstand drawer in the guest room, she froze. A small bottle of men's cologne sat there, the same brand Christian used. Natalie picked it up, her hands trembling. There was no logical reason for that cologne to be there, unless... Suddenly a noise in the hallway startled her. She quickly returned the bottle to the drawer and closed it, leaving the room before she could be caught. Her heart pounded as she climbed back into bed, feeling more confused and betrayed than ever. In the days that followed, Natalie noticed Christian avoiding her. He left for work earlier, came home later, and when he was around, he seemed restless. Jennifer, meanwhile, continued to play the role of the perfect houseguest, but her presence had become unbearable for Natalie. The breaking point came on a Saturday night. Christian announced he'd be working late, and Jennifer said she was going out to meet a friend. Left alone in the house, Natalie felt like a prisoner. Something inside her urged her to seek answers. She got in her car and decided to follow Jennifer, who had left on foot. After a few blocks, Jennifer stopped in front of a small bar and went inside. Natalie parked and waited, her heart pounding. Minutes later, she saw Christian arrive and walk into the same bar. The shock was so intense that Natalie couldn't move. Hot tears streamed down her face as the pieces of the puzzle finally fit together. When she returned home that night, Natalie couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch, staring into the void, trying to comprehend how her life had reached this point. She had taken Jennifer in out of kindness, trusted Christian as her life partner, and now it seemed both had conspired against her. When Christian finally came home in the early hours of the morning, Natalie was waiting for him in the living room. He tried to explain, but his hesitation and the nervousness in his voice only confirmed what she already knew. "I don't want to hear anything right now," Natalie said, cold and resolute. She knew this was just the beginning. More painful truths were waiting to come to light, but for now all she could do was brace herself for what was to come. The following morning was weighed down by an unbearable silence. Christian secluded himself in his upstairs office, claiming he needed focus for an important project while Jennifer stayed in her room, avoiding Natalie altogether. Natalie, however, felt like a powder keg on the verge of exploding, but she knew she needed evidence. Confronting Christian and Jennifer again with mere suspicions wouldn't be enough. If she wanted to act, she needed something concrete. Determined, she began to search. While Christian was preoccupied, Natalie went to his closet, where she found his laptop. Normally password protected, to her surprise, it was unlocked. With trembling hands, Natalie opened his emails. It didn't take long to find something that made the ground feel as though it was giving way beneath her feet. A series of messages between Christian and Jennifer. Some were innocuous, but others were devastatingly intimate. "I need you tonight. I can't wait any longer for us to have everything to ourselves." She slammed the laptop shut as if it might explode in her hands. Tears streamed freely down her face. The man she loved, the man she thought she knew, and her best friend had conspired to betray her in the sanctuary of her own home. But Natalie barely had time to process the heartbreak before another discovery left her even more shaken. A notification appeared on Christian's phone while she held it, a confirmation of a bank transfer. It was a significant amount of money sent to Jennifer. Dazed, she returned to the laptop. Digging through saved documents, she found something even more damning, a copy of the deed to their house. And the name listed as the sole owner was no longer hers. It was Jennifer's. The air seemed to vanish from Natalie's lungs. Somehow Christian had transferred ownership of the house to Jennifer without her knowledge. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated plan to leave her with nothing. That night, Natalie didn't wait for another moment of betrayal. When Jennifer came downstairs to get a glass of water, Natalie was waiting in the living room. "I want the truth, Jennifer. Why is my husband's name on the deed to my house?" Natalie demanded, holding a printed copy of the document. Jennifer froze, her face going pale. For a few seconds she tried to compose herself, but Natalie could see the panic in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Natalie shouted, taking a step forward. "You've been taking advantage of my kindness since the day you walked into this house. And now I know everything." Jennifer tried to respond, but Natalie didn't let her. "Christian wouldn't have done this on his own. You two planned this together. This isn't just an affair, is it? It's something much bigger." Finally cornered, Jennifer's patience snapped. "You're so naive, Natalie. You always have been. That's why Christian got tired of you. He needs someone who challenges him, who understands him, not a boring housewife who thinks kindness solves everything. Jennifer's words were like knives to Natalie's heart. She barely had time to react before Christian came downstairs, drawn by the shouting. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice heavy with irritation. Natalie turned to him, her eyes red from crying. "What's going on is that I've discovered everything, your affair, the house transfer. You've both betrayed me in every possible way." Christian froze for a moment, but quickly adopted the demeanor of someone trying to regain control of the situation. "Natalie, you're overreacting." "Overreacting?" She laughed bitterly, holding up the deed. "It's all here, Christian. Proof that you two plotted this behind my back." He tried to approach her, but Natalie stepped away. "Don't come near me. You're a liar." For a moment, Christian's charming mask slipped. What replaced it was something colder, darker. "I was trying to protect our future," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Protect our future," Natalie repeated, incredulous. "You gave my house to her." Christian glanced at Jennifer, who now looked uncomfortable. "We both know you'd never have the guts to fight for it. You're too good, Natalie. Too easy to manipulate." Christian's words were the final blow. Natalie looked at him, the man she had shared her life with, and realized he didn't see her as an equal but as someone to control. She turned to Jennifer, who seemed to be enjoying the spectacle. "I want both of you out of my life," Natalie said, her voice firm. Jennifer laughed, crossing her arms. "The house is mine now, Natalie. There's nothing you can do." The smug smile on Jennifer's face was the last straw. Natalie felt her anger boiling over, but lacked the strength to keep fighting. She walked out of the house carrying only a suitcase with clothes and essential documents. On the sidewalk, she paused to look back at the house one last time. That place, which once symbolized love and safety, was now just a monument to betrayal. As she walked to her car, hot tears streamed down Natalie's face. The pain was overwhelming, but alongside it, a spark of determination burned. Christian and Jennifer had taken everything from her, but she wouldn't be defeated. That night, Natalie left San Jose behind, driving to her aunt's house in another city. It was the beginning of something new. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't stay down for long. The drive to her aunt's house felt endless. Natalie's tears had dried somewhere along the way, but the pain lingered, sharp and crushing. When she arrived at the small house in a quiet neighborhood in Sacramento, she was greeted with a warm hug from her Aunt Helen, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes who had always been a maternal figure in Natalie's life. "Oh, sweetheart, what happened?" Helen asked, her concern evident as she helped carry Natalie's lone suitcase inside. For a moment, Natalie hesitated. How could she explain the depth of the betrayal and devastation she had endured? But as she looked at Helen, she felt a wave of trust. Her aunt wouldn't judge her. Helen was a wise woman, someone who had faced her own challenges with courage. Over the next few days, Natalie began to adjust to her new reality. She slept in the small guest room, simple but cozy. She spent her mornings helping Helen with household chores, and in the afternoons, she took long walks through the quiet streets of the neighborhood to clear her mind. Despite the calm routine, nights were the hardest. When the world was silent, her thoughts returned with force. She saw images of Christian and Jennifer laughing together in her living room, heard the coldness in Christian's voice, and felt the sting of Jennifer's cruel words. Natalie often woke up in the middle of the night, gasping for air as if falling into an endless abyss. One morning, Helen entered the room carrying a tray of coffee and toast. She found Natalie sitting on the bed, staring blankly out the window. "You can't go on like this, dear," Helen said, sitting beside her. "I know it hurts, but if you let this pain consume you, they win." "I've lost everything, Aunt Helen," Natalie said, her voice trembling. "My home, my marriage, my faith in people." Helen took her hand firmly. "You haven't lost everything. You still have yourself, and as long as you have that, you can rebuild the rest." Helen's words were like a balm, though Natalie wasn't yet sure how to act on them. That afternoon, Natalie decided she needed something to occupy her mind. During a short walk through town, she came across a charming flower shop with a sign in the window that read, "Help Wanted." On impulse, she went inside. The shop was small, but full of life. Brightly colored flowers filled the space with pleasant fragrances, and there was something soothing about the environment. An older woman with a warm smile approached her. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Actually, I'm interested in the job," Natalie replied, surprising even herself. The shop owner, who introduced herself as Margaret, asked a few quick questions. Impressed by Natalie's honesty and kind demeanor, she hired her on the spot. Over the next few days, Natalie started to settle into the job. Arranging bouquets, organizing flowers, and helping customers brought an unexpected sense of peace. Each bloom she handled seemed to heal a small part of her soul. But even with the new routine, shadows of the past lingered. One afternoon, as Natalie watered some plants, she overheard two women discussing betrayals in their relationships. The conversation brought tears to her eyes. Margaret noticed and approached her. "Dear, is there something you'd like to talk about?" Margaret asked gently. Natalie hesitated but eventually shared her story, summarizing the most painful events. Margaret listened attentively, and when Natalie finished, she placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's a terrible story, but it's not the end. What they took from you can be reclaimed in some form, and what can't, well, maybe it wasn't as valuable as you thought." Margaret's words echoed in Natalie's mind that night as she reflected on what she had truly lost. Yes, her house was important, but it was just a material possession. What hurt the most was the betrayal, the feeling of being discarded by two people she loved and trusted. A week later, as Natalie walked home from work, something extraordinary happened. The screech of tires drew her attention. She turned to see a car skidding out of control, heading toward a small boy frozen in the middle of the street. Without hesitation, Natalie ran. Each step felt like an eternity as the car drew closer. At the last second, she pulled the boy to safety, both of them tumbling onto the sidewalk. The car came to a screeching halt just feet away. Natalie, breathless and clutching the crying child, checked to make sure he was unharmed. "My God, Miguel!" a man shouted as he rushed out of the car. He was tall with dark hair and eyes full of worry. When he saw Natalie holding his son, relief and gratitude washed over his face. "You saved him," the man exclaimed, helping Natalie to her feet. Still trembling, Natalie tried to soothe the boy, who clung to her neck, sobbing. "It was close," she said, her voice shaking. The man introduced himself as Elliot, the boy's father, and insisted on taking Natalie and Miguel to a nearby cafe to recover. Sitting at a table with a warm cup of tea, Natalie finally began to calm down as Elliot repeatedly thanked her for her courage. Miguel, still shy, stayed by her side, holding her hand as if she were a newfound protector. Elliot, clearly intrigued by the woman who had risked her life for his son, asked about her. Natalie, hesitant at first, shared fragments of her story. When she mentioned the betrayal she'd suffered and the loss of her home, Elliot's expression turned serious. "No one should have to go through that alone," he said firmly. "I'm a lawyer and I can help you fight for what's yours." Elliot's offer was unexpected, but something in his voice made Natalie believe he was sincere. For the first time since everything had happened, she felt a glimmer of hope. That night, as she returned home, Natalie told Helen about her encounter with Elliot and his offer of help. "Maybe it's a sign that things are starting to change," Helen said with a smile. Natalie didn't know if Elliot could help her reclaim what she had lost, but for the first time, she felt she wasn't fighting alone anymore. In the days following her meeting with Elliot, Natalie felt a renewed determination she hadn't experienced in a long time. Elliot wasted no time, scheduling a meeting to go over the details of her situation and outline the next steps. When Natalie arrived at Elliot's office, a modest but well-organized space, she felt a mix of nerves and relief. Elliot greeted her with a welcoming smile, while Miguel played quietly with building blocks in the corner. The scene reinforced something Natalie was beginning to realize. Elliot was different from Christian. There was no arrogance in him, only sincerity and dedication. "Let's start from the beginning," Elliot said, taking out a notepad. "I want to understand exactly how this happened." Natalie recounted everything in detail. The changes in Christian's behavior, Jennifer's arrival, the messages on the phone, and finally, the discovery of the house transfer. As she spoke, the weight of the memories bore down on her, but Elliot's attentive demeanor encouraged her to continue. "He transferred the house into her name without your consent?" Elliot asked, frowning deeply. "Yes, and I don't even know how he managed to do it. I didn't think that was possible." Elliot nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "This sounds like manipulation or even document forgery. This is serious, Natalie. We can challenge this, but it's going to take patience." He explained the legal process, detailing the need to investigate how the transfer occurred, gather evidence and file a lawsuit to contest the legitimacy of the documents. "I want to fight," Natalie said, her voice tinged with worry. But I don't have the money to hire a lawyer. Elliot gave her a kind smile. That's not something you need to worry about right now. I'm confident we can find a solution. Those words lit a spark within Natalie. For the first time since leaving San Jose, she felt genuine hope that she could reclaim some of what had been taken from her. In the weeks that followed, Natalie threw herself into the fight. With Elliot's guidance, she began gathering every document and record that could support her case. She visited county offices, requested copies of old emails, and meticulously documented the events leading up to her betrayal. Elliot proved to be more than just a dedicated lawyer. He became a reliable friend, someone who genuinely seemed to care about her well-being. One particularly exhausting afternoon, after a visit to the records office, Elliot suggested a break. You need to take a breath, Natalie. This process can be long, but we'll get there, he said, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table. Natalie looked at him, a wave of gratitude washing over her. Do you really think I can get the house back? She asked. I believe you deserve justice, and I'll do everything I can to make sure you get it. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. Thank you, Elliot. I don't know what I would have done without you. As they spent more time together, their relationship began to shift. Elliot made no secret of his admiration for Natalie, but respected her boundaries. Natalie, though cautious, couldn't deny the growing connection between them. One evening, as they walked together after a meeting, Natalie decided to open up a little more. You've been so kind to me. I don't know how I can ever repay you, she said softly. Elliot stopped and looked at her with seriousness. You already do, just by being who you are. A courageous, resilient woman who's had everything taken from her and is still standing, still fighting. For a moment, Natalie was speechless. For so long she had felt broken, but Elliot's words made her see herself in a new light. Even as Natalie began to rebuild herself, the road to justice was far from easy. One day, Elliot received a letter from Christian and Jennifer's lawyers. They not only denied any wrongdoing in the house transfer, but also insinuated that Natalie was attempting to extort them. These two really have no limits, Elliot said, frustrated, as he read the letter. What does this mean for the case? Natalie asked, her worry evident. It means they're trying to intimidate you, but it won't work. Now we have something even stronger. Their character is on trial, and we can use that against them. Natalie felt anger rising within her. Jennifer and Christian hadn't just stolen her house and shattered her trust. They were now trying to paint her as the villain. They won't get away with this, she said firmly. Elliot smiled. That's the spirit. Over the following months, the case took shape. Elliot gathered evidence showing irregularities in the documents and exposed inconsistencies in Christian and Jennifer's statements. But there was a new challenge. To present the case, Natalie would need to return to San Jose and confront the people who had destroyed her life. The decision wasn't easy, but Natalie knew it was necessary. I'm ready to face this, she told Elliot, as she signed the final documents before the initial hearing. He looked at her with a mix of pride and concern. I'll be by your side every step of the way, he said. That night, as Natalie stood in front of the mirror preparing for the trip, she noticed something different in her eyes. There was still pain, but there was also strength. The strength of someone who, despite everything, was ready to fight. Natalie entered the San Jose courthouse with sweaty palms and a racing heart. The room was cold and intimidating, with dark wooden walls and the murmurs of lawyers and clients filling the space. Beside her, Elliot remained calm, his steady presence anchoring her in a sea of uncertainty. When Natalie spotted Christian and Jennifer on the other side of the room, her entire body tensed. Jennifer, impeccable as always, wore a dress that screamed confidence, while Christian flashed his cynical smile. Both appeared certain they would emerge victorious. Elliot noticed Natalie's hesitation and leaned in to whisper, "Remember, they have to lie to keep up appearances. You only need to tell the truth." His reassuring words gave Natalie the push she needed. As the judge entered and the case began, Elliot laid out the arguments methodically. He detailed how the deed transfer had been executed without Natalie's consent, highlighting irregularities in the signed documents. Natalie watched in admiration as he dismantled Christian and Jennifer's narrative piece by piece. Jennifer was the first to testify. Wearing an expression of feigned innocence, she tried to justify the transfer, claiming Natalie had verbally authorized it in a moment of desperation. Natalie was in crisis, her marriage was falling apart, and I just wanted to help, Jennifer said, forcing an emotional tone. Elliot stood, adjusting his tie, and began his cross-examination. Ms. Jennifer, can you confirm where Natalie was when she allegedly gave this verbal permission? Jennifer hesitated. Well, she was at the house. Elliot produced a document and handed it to the judge. Here is evidence that Natalie was out of town on the date in question. Jennifer's face turned red. Next, Christian was called to testify. He appeared more confident, adopting a defensive posture. Natalie and I were having marital issues. I decided to transfer the house to ensure she wouldn't lose everything in the event of a divorce, he said, his tone carefully rehearsed. Elliot swiftly countered with damning evidence, including text messages between Christian and Jennifer, openly discussing their plan to take the house from Natalie. So, Mr. Christian, you want the court to believe this was all to protect Natalie, despite omitting the transfer from her and being involved in an intimate relationship with Jennifer? Elliot asked, his voice firm. Christian shifted uncomfortably. When it was Natalie's turn to testify, her hands trembled as she held the Bible for the oath, but Elliot's steady gaze encouraged her. In a strong voice, she recounted the events that had brought her to this moment. Her words were filled with emotion, but also a clarity that starkly contrasted with the lies from Christian and Jennifer. All I did was trust the people I loved. They used my kindness as a weapon against me, but I won't stay silent anymore. When she finished, she saw the impact of her testimony reflected on the jurors' faces. The hearing dragged on for hours, but as more evidence and testimonies were presented, the truth began to surface. Jennifer's confidence gave way to irritation, and Christian looked increasingly defeated. When the session adjourned for deliberation, Natalie and Elliot stepped outside the courthouse. She took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. "You were incredible in there," Elliot said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I don't know if it was enough. They still have so much power. The truth always carries more weight than any lie," he replied with a reassuring smile. In the days that followed, as they awaited the court's decision, Natalie tried to keep herself busy. Though the tension was palpable, Helen and Margaret called frequently, offering words of encouragement. One evening, Elliot invited Natalie to dinner at a quiet restaurant. Their conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and lighter topics, a welcome reprieve from weeks of stress. "You have a strength that few people possess, Natalie," he said, meeting her gaze. She felt her cheeks flush. "I think I'm just trying to survive." "No, you're fighting to live, and that's much more than survival." As the dinner ended, Elliot walked her to her car. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection both recognized but neither dared to voice. Finally, the day of the ruling arrived. In the courtroom, the judge entered with an impassive expression, and Natalie's heart felt like it was lodged in her throat. When the verdict was read, it became clear. The deed transfer was declared invalid due to irregularities and lack of consent. Jennifer and Christian were ordered to return the property to Natalie and cover all legal fees. A wave of relief and emotion washed over Natalie. Christian, seated beside Jennifer, looked utterly defeated. Jennifer, on the other hand, erupted in anger, accusing the court of injustice as an officer escorted her out of the room. Elliot smiled, shaking Natalie's hand. "You did it." As they stepped out into the sunlight, everything felt brighter than it had in years. Natalie knew the journey to rebuild her life would still be long, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something she thought she'd lost: freedom. Natalie stepped into her reclaimed home, feeling a mix of triumph and dread. The court victory had restored her ownership, but the state of the property reflected months of neglect and deliberate sabotage by Christian and Jennifer. Accompanied by Elliot and a court officer for her safety, she took in the sight of scratched walls, broken furniture, and the once thriving garden now overrun with weeds. "It looks like they wanted to leave their mark right up to the end," Elliot said, surveying the wreckage of the living room. Natalie didn't cry as she thought she might. Instead, she drew a deep breath and replied, "It doesn't matter. What matters is that it's mine again." With Elliot by her side, Natalie began the arduous process of cleaning up the physical and emotional wreckage left behind. But the challenges didn't stop there. Jennifer, furious at her loss, started spreading rumors in the neighborhood and on social media, accusing Natalie of manipulating the system to win in court. "She's calling you an opportunist," Helen said over the phone, her tone heavy with concern. Natalie sighed. "She can say whatever she wants. The people who matter know the truth. But her hard-earned peace was disrupted again when Christian unexpectedly showed up at the house one afternoon. Natalie was in the garden replanting flowers when she heard footsteps behind her. Natalie. She turned to find Christian standing at the gate, looking gaunt and unkempt. His eyes carried a desperate gleam. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "We need to talk, please." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Part of her wanted to send him away, but another part was curious to hear what he had to say. "You have 5 minutes," she said, crossing her arms. Christian began speaking, his voice choked with emotion. He admitted that Jennifer had manipulated him, using him for her own gain. "I ruined everything, Natalie. I made terrible mistakes, and now she's left me with nothing, no money, no home, no... You." His words, laden with regret, didn't move her. "You weren't manipulated, Christian. You made a choice. You chose to betray my trust, to destroy our marriage, and to take everything from me. And now you want my compassion?" Christian's desperation grew. "I just want a chance to make things right. Please." Before Natalie could respond, Elliot appeared in the doorway. His expression hardened when he saw Christian. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, walking toward them. Natalie turned to Elliot and replied firmly, "Yes." He was just leaving. Christian hesitated, but seeing the resolve in Natalie's eyes, he turned and left. As he walked away, Elliot stepped closer. "Are you all right?" "I am," Natalie said, realizing it was true. For the first time, Christian no longer held any power over her. Their relief was short-lived. Moments later, shouting erupted from across the street. Natalie and Elliot rushed over to find Jennifer in her garden, screaming into her phone. "No, you can't do this to me. I gave you everything." Jennifer seemed completely unhinged. As Natalie watched from a distance, she realized that Jennifer's world was crumbling. She had been evicted from the apartment she'd rented with Christian's money, and her arrogance had alienated even her closest allies. Surprisingly, Natalie didn't feel satisfaction, only a strange calm. That evening, Natalie and Elliot shared a bottle of wine on the couch. "It's been a day," Elliot said with a wry smile. Natalie nodded, leaning forward with her glass in hand. "I think I'm finally starting to believe I can leave the past behind." Elliot looked at her, the warm glow of the room softening his features. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Natalie. If anyone can move forward, it's you." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Natalie allowed herself to feel something beyond pain and anger. Slowly she leaned in, and Elliot met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, filled with emotion and a quiet promise of new beginnings. Days later, their newfound happiness was interrupted by an alarming phone call. Christian and Jennifer had crossed paths again, and a heated argument had escalated dangerously. Natalie and Elliot rushed to the house, finding it in chaos. Jennifer and Christian were in the kitchen, hurling accusations at each other. "I never should have trusted you," Jennifer screamed. "And you thought you could use me forever?" Christian shot back. In the heat of their argument, Jennifer made a wild gesture that knocked an object onto the stove, rupturing a gas line. The sharp smell of gas filled the room, and before anyone could react, a violent explosion shook the house. Natalie and Elliot, still outside, were thrown backward by the blast. Flames engulfed the house almost instantly, and the shouts inside gave way to an eerie silence. By the time firefighters arrived, it was too late. Christian and Jennifer hadn't survived. Standing beside Elliot, Natalie watched the flames consume the home that had once been hers. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. "It's over," she whispered. "It's the start of something new," Elliot replied, holding her hand. As the fire subsided, Natalie felt an unexpected lightness. The ashes weren't just remnants of destruction. They marked the end of a chapter she was finally ready to leave behind. The acrid smell of smoke still lingered in the air as firefighters declared the blaze under control. The flames that had consumed the house in mere minutes were now reduced to smoldering embers and charred wood. Natalie stood silently beside Elliot, feeling the warm wind from the dying embers against her skin. The scene was surreal, almost like a fever dream she hoped to wake from. The house, once a symbol of love and stability, then a stage for betrayal and manipulation, was now nothing but ruins. The life Natalie had once known lay literally in ashes before her eyes. "We've got the situation contained," the fire chief said as he approached. Unfortunately, the 2 occupants didn't survive. Natalie nodded quietly, absorbing the news. It wasn't unexpected, but hearing it confirmed brought a heavy sense of closure. She wasn't sure how to feel. Jennifer and Christian had been the source of so much pain in her life, but the way things ended was undeniably tragic. Elliot stood beside her, his comforting hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his tone respectful. Natalie took a moment before replying. "I don't know," she admitted. "I think part of me wanted them to face the consequences, but not like this." "You're not responsible for this," Elliot said firmly. "Their choices brought them here." As firefighters continued sifting through the wreckage, Natalie turned her gaze away. It was hard to face what had once been a place where she dreamed of building a family, a life she thought was filled with love. Now those dreams felt distant, irrelevant even. By the time they left the scene, night had fallen. In the car, the silence between Natalie and Elliot was comfortable yet meaningful. He drove steadily, the headlights cutting through the darkness while she stared out the window, lost in thought. "What's on your mind?" Elliot asked, breaking the silence. Natalie sighed. "I think I'm finally starting to understand what it means to let the past go." Elliot didn't reply immediately, but he reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The simple gesture carried profound reassurance. The days that followed brought a whirlwind of emotions. The house fire became a topic of discussion in the neighborhood and inevitably drew unwanted attention. Natalie was summoned by the police to give a statement recounting the events leading up to the tragedy. With Elliot by her side, she explained the confrontation between Christian and Jennifer, making it clear there was nothing she could have done to prevent the outcome. "The explosion was an accident," Natalie told the investigator. "They were arguing when the gas line ruptured." The officer nodded, jotting down notes. It seems their conflict had escalated significantly in the past few days. Neighbors reported frequent shouting matches. Hearing this, Natalie felt a strange sense of relief. It might have been cruel, but she realized that in the end, Jennifer and Christian had destroyed each other. As the legalities surrounding the incident were sorted out, Natalie and Elliot began reorganizing their lives. Elliot worked tirelessly, helping her navigate the insurance claims and arrange the sale of the lot where the house once stood. "Have you thought about what you want to do next?" Elliot asked one afternoon as they reviewed paperwork. Natalie paused to reflect. "I don't want to rebuild there. That house, it was the site of so many painful memories. I want to start somewhere new, with a fresh start." Elliot smiled. "That makes sense. You deserve a place that represents a true new beginning." With funds from the insurance payout and the sale of the land, Natalie started searching for a new home. This time she focused on finding something small but cozy in a quiet neighborhood. Elliot joined her on every visit, his presence making the process feel less daunting. One evening, while having dinner at Helen's house, Natalie voiced something she had been holding back. "Elliot, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me." He gave her that calm smile that always made her feel safe. "You don't need to thank me, Natalie. I did it because I wanted to, because you deserve someone by your side." His words touched her deeply. For the first time, Natalie allowed herself to feel something beyond gratitude. She began to realize that the space Christian had once occupied in her heart was gradually being filled by something new. The following week, as they strolled through the park with Miguel and Max, Elliot stopped suddenly. "Natalie, I need to tell you something." She turned to him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "What is it?" Elliot took a deep breath. "From the day you saved Miguel, I knew you were special, but after everything we've been through, I've come to see you're so much more. You're strong, resilient, and I can't imagine my life without you." His words made Natalie's heart race. She looked at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "Elliot," he interrupted her, gently taking her hand. "I'm not saying this to pressure you. I just want you to know how I feel." Natalie took a deep breath, overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. "I feel something for you too. I'm just afraid of getting hurt again." "I know," he said with a kind smile. "I'm willing to wait as long as you need." She made the decision then and there. Leaning forward, she kissed him softly, a gesture filled with emotion and the promise of a new beginning. When they pulled away, Elliot smiled, and Natalie knew she had made the right choice. From that moment, their lives began to intertwine, naturally and peacefully. For the first time, Natalie felt she was truly leaving the past behind, not as a victim, but as a survivor ready to embrace life again. The months following the tragedy brought significant changes to Natalie's life. Rebuilding was challenging, but every small victory reaffirmed that she was finally in control of her destiny. The sale of her old property was finalized, and with the money she purchased a new home, a cozy house in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees and a garden she couldn't wait to care for. On moving day, Elliot and Miguel were there to help her settle in. Miguel, curious and full of energy, darted around the empty living room while Natalie unpacked boxes. Max, her loyal golden retriever, followed close behind, barking happily. "I think they've claimed the place before you even had the chance," Elliot joked, carrying a stack of books to the shelf. Natalie laughed, a sound that had been absent from her life for far too long. "In a way, I think this place belongs to them more than it does to me." After hours of work, the house began to feel more like a home. Helen arrived with an apple pie and a bottle of wine to celebrate the move. "This is the start of something beautiful, my dear," Helen said, wrapping Natalie in a warm hug. "And you deserve every bit of happiness that comes your way." Helen's words stayed with Natalie that evening. Sitting on the porch and gazing at the stars, she reflected on how much her life had changed. The pain of betrayal and the destruction of her old home felt distant now, like a storm that had finally passed. But not everything was easy. Despite her court victory and new beginning, memories of the past haunted her at unexpected moments. One afternoon, while organizing her belongings, she found an old photo of her wedding with Christian. He was smiling, looking at her as though she was the love of his life. The sight of the photo tightened her throat. She sat on the floor, holding it in her hands. "I won't let this define me," she whispered, placing the picture in a box destined for donation. As Natalie worked to heal her emotional wounds, her bond with Elliot blossomed. He was unlike anyone she had ever known. There was no rush, no pressure, just steady, genuine support. One evening, while they were having dinner after putting Miguel to bed, Natalie decided to open up completely. "You know, Elliot, sometimes I wonder how all of this happened, how I ended up trusting people who betrayed me so deeply." Elliot listened intently, as he always did. "Trust is a virtue, Natalie, but it's also a risk. What happened wasn't your fault. It was their choices." Natalie nodded, letting his words sink in. "Maybe it took a while, but I'm starting to believe that." Elliot smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "And I believe that sometimes we have to go through hard times to find something even better." Days turned into weeks, and Natalie began to feel the emotional weight of the explosion more than its practical consequences. While she had never wished for such a tragic end for Christian and Jennifer, she understood that in some way, the incident had closed a chapter of her life that could never be reopened. One sunny morning, while tending her new garden, Natalie received an unexpected visit from a former neighbor in San Jose. He stood awkwardly at her gate, holding a small bag. "Sorry to drop by like this, Natalie," he said, "but I found this in the wreckage of your old house. Thought you might want it back." Inside the bag was a slightly charred wooden picture frame, but the photo inside was intact. It showed Natalie on a summer day, sitting on the porch with Max and Jennifer beside her. The shock was immediate. The image brought back a flood of memories, but this time Natalie didn't feel pain. She thanked the neighbor and placed the frame on her kitchen table. Staring at the photo, she realized she no longer felt the weight of that lost friendship or the anger that once consumed her. "This is who I was," she murmured, "but it's not who I am now." The frame was tucked away in a drawer, not as a symbol of bitterness, but as a reminder of how far she had come. Over time, Natalie's new house became a true home. She began cultivating flowers in the garden, finding peace and renewal in the process. Miguel loved helping, often ending up covered in dirt, much to his delight. Elliot, ever present, introduced small but meaningful changes to her life. He encouraged her to explore new opportunities, to go out more, and to rediscover what brought her joy. One quiet evening, as Natalie and Elliot strolled through the park with Miguel and Max, she stopped suddenly, overcome by a thought. "What is it?" Elliot asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how much has changed. A few months ago I thought my life was over. Now I'm here and I feel whole." Elliot smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's because you fought for this, Natalie. You chose to start again." Later that night, after putting Miguel to bed with a tender kiss on his forehead, Natalie returned to the living room to find Elliot waiting with 2 glasses of wine. "A toast?" he asked, smiling. "To what?" "To the future, to everything that's yet to come." Natalie raised her glass, feeling a confidence she hadn't known in years. "To the future," she echoed, smiling. As their glasses clinked softly, Natalie realized that while the scars of her past remained, they no longer defined her. She was so much more than the pain she had endured. The morning dawned peacefully, with sunlight streaming gently through the windows of Natalie's new home, casting a warm glow over the cozy space. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen as she prepared breakfast, her movements calm and unhurried, a reflection of the newfound peace she had embraced. Miguel, now 5 years old, darted around the living room with Max, laughing as he tried to wrestle a ball away from the playful golden retriever. Elliot appeared in the doorway, watching the scene unfold with a soft smile. He walked over to Natalie, wrapping her in a warm embrace and placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. "Looks like it's going to be a beautiful day," he said. "It does, doesn't it?" Natalie replied, placing a stack of pancakes on a plate. The atmosphere was a stark contrast to everything Natalie had endured in the past. The chaos, pain and doubt that once dominated her life now felt like distant shadows. Each new day reminded her that she had not only survived, but had rebuilt her life with strength and intention. After breakfast, the little family headed out to the garden. Miguel loved helping plant flowers, even if his enthusiasm often resulted in more mess than progress. Natalie watched with a smile as he ran circles around Elliot, peppering him with questions about the tools and plants. "Daddy, can we plant that flower over there?" Miguel asked, pointing to a sapling Natalie had bought the day before. Elliot chuckled, handing the plant to his son. "Of course, but you'll have to take care of it every day." Miguel nodded solemnly, accepting the responsibility with the seriousness of a new gardener. As the two worked side by side, Natalie settled into a rocking chair on the porch, watching them with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. Memories of the past still surfaced occasionally, but they now felt like stories from a different life, one lived by someone she no longer recognized. She thought about Christian and Jennifer, not with anger, but with a quiet compassion. They had been consumed by their own ambitions and flaws, unable to see beyond their selfishness. Natalie, on the other hand, had found a way to rise above it all, to value what truly mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Elliot asked, sitting beside her with a cup of coffee in hand. Natalie smiled and turned to him. "How unpredictable life is. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here with you, I never would have believed it." Elliot took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I think what matters isn't where we start, but how we choose to move forward. And you've done that with incredible courage." His words warmed her heart, and a single tear slid down her cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Elliot. You showed me that it was possible to trust again, to love again." Elliot looked at her with tenderness and, in an unexpected gesture, reached into his pocket to pull out a small velvet box. "Natalie, you didn't just change my life. You changed Miguel's too. You've brought light and love into our world, and I never want that to end." He opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Time seemed to freeze. Natalie looked at Elliot, then at Miguel, who was now watching them curiously from the garden. A wave of emotion washed over her, and the answer came before she even had a chance to think. "Yes, I will." Elliot beamed as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Miguel ran over, cheering loudly even though he didn't fully understand the significance of the moment. "We're going to be a real family now," he shouted, throwing his arms around them with all the energy his small body could muster. That evening, as they sat under the clear night sky, Natalie reflected on how much her life had changed. What began as a story of betrayal and pain had transformed into one of resilience and renewal. She thought of the scars she carried, both visible and invisible, and for the first time she didn't see them as marks of suffering but as symbols of triumph. They were reminders of who she had been and who she had become, a woman who had risen from the ashes of her past to build something new and beautiful. With Elliot and Miguel by her side and Max curled up at her feet, Natalie finally felt whole. The pain of her past had been left behind, and the future stretched out before her full of endless possibilities. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and allowed herself to feel a quiet, powerful happiness. It was proof that even after the most devastating storms, a new beginning was always possible. Do you believe it's possible to start over from scratch after losing everything to the people you trusted most? Share in the comments how you would handle such an intense twist. Your story could inspire others, and if you missed the last story we shared on the channel, here's what happened. After years of enduring oppression and violence, Veronica Winston's life took a dramatic turn when her husband, Braden, slapped her for asking for money to get her hair done. The shame turned into determination, and what seemed like the end became the starting point for her fight for freedom. Surrounded by threats and dark secrets, Veronica faces an influential man willing to do anything to silence her. But how far will she go to protect herself and her children? Click the video now appearing on your screen and find out all the details of this moving story. See you there.